Hello, welcome to this edition of Severe Weather Outlooks. I'm meteorologist Ted Keller. It's a Sunday morning, and I have been starting lately with the Supercell Composite outlook for the next 7 days because it does a pretty good job of just kind of summarizing where the trouble will be. So we're looking at the probability of supercells, and when it gets into that red area there, about 30%, that's actually pretty high. It's as high as the scale goes, and this corridor right here is where all the action is going to happen over the next, well, really 4 days. So let's break it down. Starting with today, we have an interesting kind of smattering of marginal risk areas down here in the Carolinas, up here in Maine, and down here in southern Arizona, monsoonal action. But certainly this catches your attention right here. We have this, what I like to refer to as the thunderstorm slide that develops sometimes in the late spring and certainly in the summer, where we have cooler, more stable air masses up here and a big high producing all that heat. Look, there's not even a thunderstorm forecast for this area. That's how suppressive that is for that type of activity. But let's switch our attention to these level 2 areas, what are still referred to as the slight risk areas from a while back. So we have two corridors. This one I'll show you in a minute is mostly hail. This one is a combination of all severe weather elements, especially wind and tornadoes. So here's the tornado risk for Sunday, centered on Chicagoland, really. So this is the 2% risk of any strength of tornado within 25 miles of any point you pick. So it's pretty much centered on Chicago and includes not only Chicago and the suburbs, but over into Kalamazoo, Michigan, over into South Bend and Fort Wayne, Indiana, down to Kankakee. They're familiar with tornadoes this year, back in March. Davenport and Dubuque are in this as well, and Rockford. Not quite to Madison and Milwaukee, but a lot of southern parts of Wisconsin as well. And so on the wind risk side, there is this area here, a 15% chance of a severe wind gust, a damaging wind gust. And also this area out here, both of those are coincident with the slight risk area. And then there's a little bit of a hatched area here, which is the SPC's new parameter introduced earlier this year that attempts to assign a percentage chance to intensity of wind. There are 3 levels of this, and this is the level 1 right here. So you say there's again, it's all going to probably stay below 75 miles per hour and about a 50-50 chance or more that it'll stay below 64 miles per hour for any wind gusts that occur in that area, which is also the highest probability. So those go well in South Dakota matching together. Hail risk hasn't been much of an issue, but it has been highlighted today at a 15% risk in that slight risk area, with again another hatching area showing, and you can read the percentages there. Again, it's heavily weighted toward less than 1.5 inches. The official criteria is 1 inch, so in case you're wondering about that. And those are just the criteria. You know, there really isn't a criteria for a foot of 1/2 inch hail. Although that's not damaging, it is certainly disrupting. And that's really what they're talking about, of course, is damage to property and also injury concerns for people. So this is NATOcast for today. They have put that up to a 5% tornado risk here, again, centered almost exactly where the SPC has their outlook area today. So if I were in the Chicagoland area, I'd be watching the skies very carefully today and tonight as these thunderstorms continue to evolve. On the tornado risk side of StormNet, there is a pulse. I was looking at this hour by hour, which you can do the day of. I didn't really see a real focused area like this show up, but I did see a kind of a general area that agrees with all those forecasts I just showed you. So even though this bullseye is for 8 to 9 o'clock tonight, I would consider it a validation, really, if maybe a little bit less of a validation that that tornado area is going to be centered where it is. And you can look at Colorado State University's product here, and there's a 5% bullseye right around Rockford over to Dubuque, Iowa there. So that is pretty coincident. And they're also pretty jacked with this learning machine about the wind probabilities. They're up to 30%. Again, sweeping across northern Illinois, northern Indiana, maybe a sliver of southern Michigan. Then we turn the page to Monday. As I've been saying on these outlooks, this is a slow-moving slide of thunderstorms. So this entire area here has a risk, obviously emphasized by this level 2 area. So many of the same locations we just talked about here in Illinois and Indiana are included, but it's just now expanded all the way over to Pittsburgh and now includes Indianapolis and pretty much the entire state of Ohio. The tornado risk slides with that. There's a 2% risk, a little bit of variance on where this might be placed on Monday. Not unexpected for a day 2 outlook, especially in the summer, where mesoscale features make such a big difference on where you would put a tornado possibility, but that 2% risk area runs from the Peoria and Champaign and area due east all the way to Pittsburgh, PA. Includes Fort Wayne, Columbus, Cleveland on the edge of that. Toledo is on the edge of that, but you can kind of see where that corridor has been set up for Monday. And the wind risk coincides with that, pretty much the same area, maybe a little bit bigger, 15% chance there. Now, I did look at StormNet for tornado risk, and interestingly, they put the maximum way back in Illinois. So remember, that's on the edge of where the SPC has put that. That's right there, roughly. So yeah, it's a 20% chance there, centered just north of Bloomington. So we'll see what happens with that. Again, very sensitive to the small scale details of thunderstorms that came before it. And to prove that point even more, CSU's learning machine has looked at the data from previous runs and put the tornado threat way up here in northern Pennsylvania and parts of Ohio and even New York State. So that's interesting to me. Meanwhile, on their outlook, you can see there that next kind of shading of lavender or light purple there. That's a 45% risks right there south of Cleveland in Ohio of severe wind gusts, where the hail is just kind of split up a little bit more. Then on Tuesday, this continues to be, again, the thunderstorm slide, where you just have this transition zone, and it's set up pretty effectively. So from central Illinois to West Virginia, basically, it's shifted a little bit out of the areas from the previous 2 days and more to the south and more to the southeast now, including parts of Kentucky and more of Indiana. On CSU's outlook for that, the tornado risk, again, for Tuesday is up here. So all over the dial on this stuff. So just be watching very carefully in these areas, the southern Great Lakes states, over to the kind of the eastern U.S., but not quite all the way over to Virginia. Just be mindful of these areas. And then to drive that point home even more, here's Wednesdays where we have this blob of 15% risk of any severe weather in West Virginia and Virginia, with adjacent areas of Maryland and Pennsylvania including that. And then on the back return flow side of these stable highs that are moving through here, we have more around Rapid City down into western parts of Nebraska. I did want to point out on Wednesday that the severe probabilities are centered, and this is anything, a tornado, a severe wind gust, or a 1-inch hailstorm, is 30% right around eastern Kentucky, and there's the SPC outlooks that go with that. So as you might expect, there's a lot more disagreement, of course, the longer you get, the further out you get into the future. And then on Thursday, this is the last meaningful area of a 15% risk that is out here in the Carolinas, mostly in parts of South Virginia. Now, let's go back to the supercell composites, 2 more looks. So we have week 2 that goes from the 16th of August through the 22nd. Same kind of corridor, but shifting back to the north as these stable highs kind of retreat a little bit, and the jet stream retreats along with it. It's what determines the storm track and where things are going to stall. So it's amazing that this actually has kept going into the summer. Usually this map starts to look very dry in August, but that is not the case. Look at week 3. And again, there's a lot of variability. Like yesterday, I showed week 3, which is only off by a day, of course, because it's a 7-day accumulation, but all of a sudden, boom, it's back again. So interesting across the northern plains, Great Lakes states, and then whatever left over usually heads off to the eastern seaboard in some respect, either from Pennsylvania down to the Carolinas when it's all done happening out here. So it definitely is a thunderstorm slide, not continuous, but at least for the next 4 days it is, maybe 5, and then maybe through the rest of August, the same kind of deal.